Up next is Uri Levine, founder of the crowdsourced navigation app Waze. I hand you over to Henry Blumenthal from Investec to welcome him.
Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. That's a quote you'll find if you Google Uri Levine. Uri most famously co-founded Waze, the world's largest driving, traffic, and navigation app, about 13 years ago. It's used around the globe by more than 750 million drivers and was acquired by Google for $1.1 billion. After that stunning accomplishment, many people would have retreated to a Long Beach with a tall margarita. But for Uri, a serial entrepreneur and natural disruptor, there is always more to do. So since the Waze acquisition, Uri has founded a number of startups, including Move It, the Waze of public transportation, which was acquired by Intel last year for $1 billion. In his own words, Uri's vision is to disrupt inefficient markets and improve under-functioning services. He wants to focus on solving big problems, saving consumers time and money while empowering them. Solving problems is what Uri, Investec, and the UJC have in common. At Investec, we too appreciate that it takes passion and empathy to fall in love with the problem. We also understand that it takes ingenuity and a commitment to shared responsibility in order to solve it. Investec's association with the UJC embodies these values. Our partnership with the UJC, our partnership with its donors and the community it serves is a source of great pride. In these tumultuous times, it is comforting to hear from someone who thrives in the theater of disruption. In that case, there can be no better perspective than that which is offered by Uri Levine. Ladies and gentlemen, Uri Levine.
Thank you. Really excited to be here, even though that I really would like to be there in South Africa and meet all of you face to face. During the last year, it turns out that we have to do things differently, right? And one of them is doing a presentation like that over Zoom or video conference platform. And for me in particular, there is one big disadvantage. I don't see the audience, right? So I don't even know if you are there. I would have to imagine that you are there, but I cannot see you. So what I would like to do in the next maybe 15 or 20 minutes is speak a little bit about startup journey, right? Because there is something really unique in going and following your passion and building something that eventually changed the world, right? For many of us. And in the future, for more words that I will be changing. This is my email, by the way, uri@urilevine.com. I do answer all of my emails. I used to say that I answer them during the long flights that I have, but no one is flying anywhere these days, right? So in particular, not out of Israel. Down on the slide, you can see the different startups that I have. I will be touch base on some of them. But I want you to think about going into this entrepreneurship journey as something that starts with a very strong emotional engagement. So maybe you really love something and you say, this is how things should be done, right? Or you run into something that you really hate and you say, no, I'm going to change that, right? I hate traffic jams, by the way, if someone wondered. Right? And you start to build your dream and the passion until you tell yourself, this is what I'm going to do. And then you realize that this is going to be a roller coaster journey with ups and downs and ups and downs. And I'm pretty sure that many of you have seen businesses, and all the businesses in the world have ups and downs. But the frequency of those in building startup are much higher. I think that I owe the best quote on that to Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the largest VC firms in the US. And he used to run a company, right? He used to be a CEO of a startup. And he was asked whether or not he was sleeping well at night as a CEO of a startup. And said, oh, yeah, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. And this is the reality. This is really the reality of building a startup. The frequency and the extreme high end, low end are actually pretty dramatic. And at the same time, I would say there is no doubt what's next. All the entrepreneurs, after this startup, they're going to build another one. And after that, another one. In most cases, if you're going to ask an entrepreneur, what are you going to do after this startup? They will tell you they're going to build another one. Now, here comes the interesting question. This next startup of yours, what it's all about, they actually know. And so we started Waze in 2007. We launched the service in Israel in 2009. By that time, I knew that my next startup is going to deal with financial services. And I built that only in 2013. And when I built that, I knew that I'm going to build another one and another one and another one. And at any given time, I will tell you, look, there are so many big problems on this planet that I would like to solve that obviously I'm not going to solve all of them. So I want you to think of building a startup exactly like falling in love. So you think of many ideas, right? And eventually there is one idea that you tell yourself, this is the one idea that I'm going to work on. You go to many dates, and eventually there is one that you tell yourself, she is the one. Now, at the beginning, you only want to spend time with your date. You don't care about the rest of the world. You're thinking of your new ventures from multiple perspectives. This is the problem I'm going to solve. These are the people that have this problem. This is what I'm going to do tomorrow morning. This is what I'm going to end up doing. This is how I'm going to raise capital and so forth until you feel confident enough. And then you go and tell your friends, this is what I'm going to do. Now, the first reaction is always the same. This will never work. They're actually lesser nice people that will tell you, this is the stupidest idea that I ever heard. Go back to your date, right? The first time that you take your date to meet your friends and they're saying, she's not for you. This is where you disengage from your friends. So the good news is that you're in love and you don't listen to anyone else. The bad news is that you are in love and you don't listen to anyone else. It really requires you to be in love and with strong passion to go into this journey, because the journey itself is a very long journey. And in particular, the longest part of this journey is the one that says lack of traction. This is where you try everything and nothing works. Right? And this is really frustrating to be in this part. Imagine that as if you are crossing a desert, right? So imagine a desert, only sand around you. You look around you, there is only sand around you. You walk all day, there is still only sand around you. You go to sleep at night, you wake up in the morning, only sand around you. You're actually making baby steps progress, but you don't see this progress. And it requires the consistency and the belief and the mission and the team to cross that desert. And this is exactly what is required when you're building a startup. Now, the journey itself, and this is really critical, is a journey of failures. Now, in reality, if you're afraid to fail, you already failed because you are not going to try. Albert Einstein used to say that if you haven't failed, that's because you haven't tried anything new before. Now, this is really, really dramatic. I think that Michael Jordan says something even better. He said, I never lost a game. I was just ran out of time. But I think that this is really important to realize that, because as soon as you realize that this is a journey of failures, and I want you to think about, you're building something new, right? That no one did before. And even though we are 100% sure that we know exactly where we are going, the reality is that we don't. So we try. We try one thing and another thing and another thing. The faster that you try those, you simply increase the number of attempts that you have in order to figure out one thing that does work. And this is the reality of all the startups. We need to figure out one thing that does work. And after that, we are actually on the road for success. This is maybe the first phase of all the startups, right? This is where you define the problem and you define the DNA of the company. But what you're trying to achieve is product market fit. You're trying to achieve something that creates value. Because if you don't, you will die. All the startups in the world that did not figure out product market fit simply died. But here comes the more interesting questions. Those that did figure out product market fit, by the way, you never heard about those that didn't. They simply died peacefully. Those that did, it was a long journey for them. And for a second, I want you to think of, all the applications that you have on your smartphones that you are using every day, right? So Google and Waze and WhatsApp and Uber and Netflix and so forth. And ask yourself, what is the difference between any of those applications that you are using today and the first time that you have used that? And the answer is that there is no difference. We are searching Google today the same way that we search Google for the first time. We are using Waze today for the same way that we did for the first time. We are watching Netflix today the same way that we did for the first time. Now, this is really dramatic because when you think about it, it was a long journey for each one of those companies until they figure out product market fit. It was 5 years for Microsoft. It was 3 years for Waze. It was 3 years for WhatsApp. It was 3 years for Google. It was 10 years for Netflix. Netflix that we know as today started in 2008. But the company started in 1998, and it was 10 years for them to figure out that this is the right value proposition. This is the product market fit for them. So this is the most critical part of the journey. And once you figure out product market fit, you are on the takeoff runway, because then essentially you can figure out the rest with knowing that you are creating value. For me, building a startup is really simple. I always start with the problem. And so if you want to follow that path, then I want you to think of a big problem, something that is worth solving, right? And then ask yourself the following question. So who has this problem? Now, if you happen to be the only person with this problem, then I would say, you know what, go to a shrink. It is much cheaper than building a startup. But if a lot of people have this problem, then the next phase is that you need to go to those people and speak to them to understand their perception of the problem. And only then go and build the solution. If you follow this path and your solution works, it's actually guaranteed that you create value. If you start with the solution, which, by the way, I've seen many startups did, you might be building something that no one cares. And this is really frustrating. So this is maybe a summary of the key takeaways of building startups, right? So who are your users and what is their perception of the problem? The second, that you stop thinking about their problem, you are starting to build things that no one cares. And then you end up by someone else is building stuff that they do care, and you're going to lose. Make your mistakes fast. By the way, I do have T-shirt for each one of those statements, and the one that I choose today is make your mistakes fast. Right? And this is dramatic, right? Once you figure that out, once you figure out that your roadmap is a list of experiments, that your marketing plan is a list of experiments, and you're looking for one thing that does work, and it doesn't matter if it's the first one or the second one or the third one on your list. And every time you go to the next one on the list with the same conviction that this is going to work, then you're actually on the right path. Product market fit, this is value creation. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. The market leader will be those that claim ownership of the problem. And by the way, the stories that they tell is very different. If you speak with an entrepreneur and you ask them, what do you do? And he say, my startup is, or our system does, they focus on the solution. If they say the problem we are solving is this, they focus on the problem. If they say this is what we are doing for you, they focus on the problem. Very different DNA of these cultures versus these cultures. And those that focus on the problem simply increase the likelihood of becoming successful. Focus turns out to be critical for startups, right? And in many cases, we say, okay, focus is about what we are doing, but the actual decisions about what we are not doing, these are the hard decisions, right? So in order to become successful, what we need to do is address the problem, right? Which basically defines these are the users, and this is their perception of the problem, and this is exactly what we are doing, addressing that. If it's not one of those, we don't care about it. So the hard decision is to say no to everything else so we can remain focused and actually become or increase our likelihood to become successful. Now, the last one turns out to be pretty tricky. I spoke with many entrepreneurs, and many of them, their last startup failed. And I asked them why. And about half of them say the team was not right. So I kept on asking, okay, what do you mean the team was not right? And some of them were saying, okay, we had this guy not good enough or this guy not good enough. So not good enough was one reason. Another reason that I heard quite often is that we had communication issues, right? Something that I actually call the ego management issues, right? And then I asked them the more interesting question, when did you know that the team is not right? Now, this is the surprising answer. All of them knew within the first month. Within the first month, all of them knew that the team is not right. There was one guy that even told me before we even started. And so you say, wait a minute. If you knew that the team is not right, the problem was not that the team was not right. The problem was that the CEO did not make hard decisions. Making easy decisions is easy. Making hard decisions is hard. This is why in most organizations, at the end of the day, these decisions will go to the top, to the CEO to be made. And if he doesn't make those, the result, by the way, is always going to be the same. The top performing people would leave because they have a choice and they don't want to be in an organization that is unable to make hard decisions. By the way, there is a very interesting research about successful CEOs and their behavior. And turns out that making decisions with conviction is the most important behavior. This and perseverance are the most important behaviors of building startups. So not giving up and making hard decisions and making them over and over and over and over again, because every time we are going into new phase of experiments. So a little bit about the Waze story, and this is really interesting story because if I would have a time machine and I will send you back into 2007 and I will be standing in front of you and I will tell you, this is what I'm going to build. You will tell me this will never work. So there was a magic of Waze that we, the drivers, create all the content, crowdsourcing all the content that is being used by the application, including the map itself. So when we started, there was a blank page. The map was a blank page, and when people started to drive, the map was actually created out of thin air. But for the evolution is that we started in 2007, and we only raised capital in 2008. And we launched the first product in Israel in 2009. Now, what we had in 2008 is actually a product running on a PDA. Remember? Long time ago, there were dinosaurs, and then PDA, and then Nokia phones. And today, we all have iPhones and Android. This long time ago is 12 years. Now, ask yourself, what's going to change in the next 12 years? But first of all, start with the imagination, right? Imagine this time machine that we're going to roll back 12 years ago, and I'm going to take away your iPhone, I'm going to take away Waze, I'm going to take away WhatsApp, I'm going to take away Netflix, I'm going to take away Uber. I'm not sure that we will survive. This is how fast things are changing. Anyhow, we launched the product in 2009, and then in Israel. And then we figure out that it's actually pretty good. And we said, wait a minute, if this is working in Israel, let's go global, right? And so we launched that global end of 2009, beginning of 2010. Remember this slide? It was simply not good enough. And this is where you go into full year of iterations, another version, another version, another version. Now, this is how it goes, right? So you realize that it doesn't work. You go and speak with drivers. They tell you what doesn't work, and you go and build the next version to address everything that they told you. And you launch the next version, and you know that this is it, and it's not. So you go back and do all over again, and you speak with the drivers. You realize what doesn't work. You build the next version. You know that this is it, and it's not. Iteration, 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 full year of iterations until we figured that out and we got to the level that of good enough. And this is dramatic because good enough wins the market, in particular, if you are free. For a second, I want you to think of Gmail, right? Everyone has Gmail today. Before, Gmail, by the way, is 16 years old. Before that, we all used to pay money in order to have a mailbox, right? We paid money to have access to the internet service provider, and we paid additional money to have a mailbox. And then Google introduced Gmail, and at the beginning it was not good enough, but after more iterations, it became good enough. And this is it, end of the market. No one can compete with something that is good enough and free. 2011, we started to actually reach the good enough level in multiple places. And in the US, that was one metropolitan after the other. Los Angeles first, and then San Francisco, in Atlanta, in Washington, DC, and New York, and Chicago, one metropolitan after the other. In Europe, that was actually Italy first, and then Netherlands, and Spain, and France, and Sweden, one country after that. And it was 2012 that Waze was actually outgrowing the entire industry combined. So you take all navigation apps, all navigation devices, all in-car navigation systems, Waze was growing faster than all of them combined. 2013, Google came with a proposal to acquire us, and we simply said yes. That was the right offer at the time, and we simply said yes. And I left. The day after, I left in order to build more startups. So this is me, right? I'm building multiple startups. All of them have the same philosophy. A lot of good to a lot of people, right? So doing good and doing well. And all of them are about solving problems. And usually I would have one or two new startups every year, sometimes less, sometimes more. And I'm investing in those through my investment vehicles or my fund that is actually investing in those. And this is what I'm doing. And this is some of my startups. And I'm not going to go over all of them. Waze and Moveit already mentioned. The Moveit is the Waze for public transportation that was acquired by Intel less than a year ago for $1 billion. Fairfly deals with the biggest secret in travel industry. What happened to airfare after you book your flight? Now, the reality is that no one knows because no one is checking what happened to the airfare after they make the reservation. Before, we know that prices are going up and down all the time. So they're going up and down before we are making the reservation, but they're also going up and down after we are making the reservation. So let's say that this is the price that you paid, and this is cancellation fees. Price drops here, you're leaving money on the table. You can actually rebook the same flight at a cheaper price. Now, if you think of individuals, then this is one thing. But if you think of corporate that have hefty travel budget, we can save you 10% of the travel budget that goes directly to the bottom line. C3, in a completely different space, agriculture technology. And in reality, the name indicates that they're actually seeing the trees, and this is exactly what they're doing. But the problem they're trying to solve is that if you have large plantations of trees, you don't know what's going on. There is no tool for you that will tell you what's going on. If you have millions of trees, you simply don't know. And so what we have is we have drones flying over the plantation, and at the level of a single tree can tell you if this tree is healthy or not. And if it's not, what is the issue? Water stress, nutrition, disease, whatever. And the reality is that we can improve the yield of 15 to 20% of each and every plantations of trees. I'm not going to review all the startups here, but these are, each one of them is addressing a single problem that it's worthwhile to solve. So I also realized that we might be running out of time and going into the question and answer discussion. But I want to share one more story. And this is, over the Waze years and after that, I had a lot of people coming to me and say, thank you for Waze. You saved me from a nightmare traffic jams. Or there was one guy that say, I owe you thousands of dollars of speeding tickets and so forth. But one of the best stories that I heard a few years back is someone came to me and say, thank you. You saved my marriage. And I said, what? I said, well, because of Waze, we don't argue anymore in the car. So you saved my marriage. So I ended up to be a marriage consultant. But I think that I owe the best story to my son. I have 5 kids. One of them today is 22 years old. And when he started to drive some 5 or 6 years back, he really liked to drive. So he would take the car and drive everywhere, right? So one day I came to him and say, drive me to the airport. He said, my phone is broken. I can't. I said, what? Here's the car. Here are the keys. Drive me to the airport. I said, no, Dad, you don't understand. My phone is broken. I don't know how to get there. So I was scratching my head for a second. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be in the car with you. And I will tell you how to get there. And then he asked me, and how would I come back? So we lose orientation, but not logic. Thank you.
Thank you, Uri. What a fascinating and inspiring journey. We salute your success and look forward to the results of your exciting new ventures. Now, we have a few questions from our audience for you. So our first question.
Absolutely.
Tell us about the meeting when Google bought Waze. I read somewhere that you entered the addresses of the executives attending in case they asked during the meeting to use the app. Is that true?
So it's a funny story because there is a confusion here of 2 stories. The addresses of the partners of the first venture that invested at Waze, and this is 2007, before we even were able to raise capital. We met with many venture capitals in Israel, and there was one guy that actually liked the story and said, okay, why don't you come and meet all the partners in an all-hand meeting? And we, in order to increase the likelihood of them investing, we basically say, let's figure out the addresses of all the partners and make sure that they're on the map. And, sure enough, during the meeting, one of the managing partner asked me, so what we are saying is that in this model, it's possible that my house is on the map. And I said, I don't know, tell me where you live and we will see. Right. And obviously I knew that the house is on the map, but I wasn't sure which house it is. And as soon as they realized that the house is on the map, they decided to invest.
Okay, so when setting out to create Waze, what was your USP, unique selling proposition, that you had in mind to differentiate Waze from other navigation systems? That's a question from one of our viewers.
So look, if you go back into the previous word, that data creation was one business and navigation software was another business, we actually combined both of them into a single platform. And we, as in a magical way, we created the data as you drive, right? And so the result was that we did not need to license traffic information or map data in order to provide you with the service because we created that as you go. And that was the unique advantage of Waze. The unique selling point was use us every day when you go to the office. We are going to tell you how long it's going to take you and what is the fastest way. On your commute, not on your navigation. Navigation is when you go someplace that you don't know how to get. And your commute is that you go places that you do know how to get. But which one is the fastest route right now?
Okay. Uri, thank you again for joining us this evening live from Israel. It's been thrilling. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night. The next item on our program is one